All right, so we're back for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
And today, we're going to be looking at the Sinn Fein Manifesto 2024.
All right.
This is their plan,
Okay.
Ireland, as you know,
Yeah.
going into the next election.
Big stuff.
And it's pretty comprehensive. So
Yeah, it is.
we'll be trying to unpack this over a couple of deep dives here. And,
Okay.
you sent this over to me. Clearly, you're interested in this.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated to see what they've come up with here.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me a little bit about
Sure.
kind of what stood out to you when you first skimmed through it?
I think just the sheer breadth of it is really interesting, right? This isn't just some bullet points on a pamphlet. This is like a really comprehensive plan for reshaping
Absolutely.
Irish society. So that's what I found interesting.
Yeah, it's not just tweaking things here and there.
Right.
They're really proposing some pretty dramatic
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
And one of those, they're not just talking about changing the tax code a little bit. They're talking about, like, abolishing the USC for anyone making under 45,000 euros.
So that's a big change.
Yeah, over 1,100 euros back in your pocket
Right.
every year, potentially.
Yeah, where does the money come from now?
Yeah, so that's one of the big questions, right? Like, how do they actually plan to pay for all this stuff?
Okay.
And one of their ideas is to use funds from the so-called Apple tax to create this 1 billion euro community investment fund. And this would target working class communities that have been hit hard by austerity. So
that makes a lot of sense.
it's a pretty clever way to kind of
address that
address the inequality, exactly.
While making investments.
Yeah, and actually investing back into those communities.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's jump into some of the specifics here. The issue on everyone's mind is housing these days. So
absolutely.
Sinn Fein is promising to deliver 125,000 new public homes by 2029.
Okay.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
Huge number.
More than double
what
the previous government managed.
Okay.
And, I know you've been
I have,
on the housing waiting list for a while.
That's right.
So what do you make of this promise? I mean, is it...
I'm curious. I mean, it's ambitious, but as always, the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah.
So to achieve this, they're talking about streamlining the procurement process, the planning processes, so that construction can happen much quicker.
Okay.
And that makes sense,
That makes sense, yeah.
It's taking so long to build anything.
Yeah, and also reform of the Land Development Agency to kind of make sure there's a steady supply of land for building.
Okay, right.
But on the other hand, they're also proposing to scrap schemes like Help to Buy.
Yeah.
Which has been pretty popular.
It has been popular.
Do you think that's going to backfire on them?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's been a concern that's been raised, right? Because a lot of first-time buyers are using that scheme. So their argument, I guess, is that it's ultimately driving up prices, benefiting developers more than buyers.
Yeah.
So they say it's better to just put that money towards direct construction of affordable homes.
Okay.
And they're talking about purchase prices starting as low as $250,000.
Wow.
And average rents capped at $1,000 per month. So
that would be.
Which would be amazing.
Amazing.
But the question is that actually achievable? In the current market, can you really do that?
Right.
So we'll have to see.
It's a big gamble, but potentially a big payoff.
It is, yeah.
If they can pull it off.
For sure.
All right. Well, let's move on to another huge issue, healthcare. They're proposing a pretty major overhaul of the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Envisioning an all-Ireland national health system, NHS for short.
Okay.
And this
is a pretty big idea.
Be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, this goes beyond just adding more beds, more doctors.
Right.
They really want to shift the way that healthcare is delivered and perceived in Ireland.
It's like a fundamental right, the way they're talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not just treating illness. It's about promoting well-being. And, one example of this is they're talking about a 250 million mental health action plan.
Okay.
With a focus on early intervention, which...
Yeah, especially given the state of mental health services in the country right now. That seems like a...
Yeah, with the wait times and everything, it's a
really
big issue.
Yeah.
And, of course, they're not forgetting about the physical side of things either.
Of course not.
They're proposing to add 5,000 new hospital beds by 2031.
Okay.
Which could significantly impact wait times for surgeries and everything.
Yeah, make a big difference there.
But, one of the big challenges I see is, finding the staff.
Where do they come from?
Where are they going to find all these doctors and nurses? They're saying they need an additional 40,000 healthcare workers.
That's a lot of people.
To make this happen.
It's a huge number.
Seems like a pretty tall order.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, big plans.
Yeah, big plans.
We'll have to see if they can actually pull this off.
We'll see.
All right, well, let's move on to an issue that affects all of us.
Okay.
Which is the cost of living.
Yeah, definitely.
How are they planning to...
Especially these days.
Ease that burden?
Okay, so they're tackling this on a few different fronts.
Okay.
Obviously, that USC abolition we were talking about earlier would put some money back in people's pockets.
Yeah.
They're also talking about affordable childcare.
Huh?
They're aiming for €10 per day.
€10 a day. That would be...
Imagine what a difference that would make for your budget.
It would be incredible.
Right.
But how are they going to pay for that?
Well, they're talking about...
How are they going to make sure the quality is good?
Increasing capacity and providing more subsidies for childminders.
Okay.
So that might help with that.
Okay.
They're also looking at things like free prescription medicines for all households.
Okay.
And they want to address the energy costs. So they're talking about halting the planned carbon tax increases and reversing the recent excise duty hikes on petrol and diesel.
Okay. So they're trying to attack it from multiple angles.
A high-pronged approach.
Yeah, but some critics might say, this is just throwing money at the problem.
Yeah.
Is this sustainable in the long run?
I think that's a valid concern, right?
Yeah.
But I guess their argument is that
Yeah.
This is what's needed right now.
Okay.
These immediate measures will alleviate the crisis, and then they can work on those longer-term solutions later.
So it's a bit of a...
So it's a balancing act.
Balancing act.
For sure.
Okay, so we've talked about housing. We've talked about healthcare. We've talked about the cost of living.
Right.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Which is?
The plan for unity.
Ah, yes.
They're not just talking about a united Ireland. They're actually setting a target to achieve it.
That's ambitious.
At the end of the decade.
Wow.
So, this is like 2030. They want to start planning for these reunification referendums.
Right.
And they want to start laying the groundwork for integration.
Yeah. This is a big deal.
One of the things they're proposing is a government green paper outlining their vision for a united Ireland.
Right.
They're also talking about a dedicated reunification and one Ireland unit within the government.
Okay.
And even giving Northern Irish MPs speaking rights.
Yeah, okay.
In the Oireachtas.
That's a big step.
So these are pretty big changes.
Huge steps towards integration.
Yeah. Do you think they're underestimating the complexities of this?
It's definitely a very sensitive and complex...
There's a lot of history there.
Absolutely.
But I guess they're saying we need to start the conversation.
They're saying it's time to start preparing for this future that they believe is inevitable.
And what about the economic implications?
Yeah.
There are some concerns about...
There's a lot of concerns.
The cost.
Yeah, how much is it going to cost to merge these two economies?
Yeah, I mean, Sinn Fein claims it's going to lead to economic growth and job creation. And they point to the potential of an all-Ireland economy.
Absolutely. But the potential is there.
There's still a lot of questions about how.
But is it going to be smooth? What are the actual costs going to be?
Right. What are the details?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
lots to consider.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of the deep dive.
Absolutely.
We've seen how they want to tackle housing, healthcare, the cost of living, even reunification.
Big issues.
But there's still a lot more to unpack in this manifesto. So we'll take a quick break.
Sounds good.
And we'll be right back to dive into even more
to come
of Sinn Féin's plans for Ireland.
All right.
Stay with us.
I'm intrigued. Okay, so we've covered kind of the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Let's zoom in on a couple of things that might actually impact people.
Into the nitty-gritty a little bit.
Yeah. So one thing that jumped out at me is their section on social welfare and pensions.
Okay.
They're actually proposing a massive increase in the budget for the Department of Social Protection.
Okay. How much are we talking?
They're talking about €6 billion over the next 5 years.
$6 billion?
A huge investment.
A lot of money.
Huge.
Why such a big increase?
Well, they argue it's essential to tackle poverty and inequality.
Okay.
Particularly child poverty, which has been a really persistent problem in Ireland.
Yeah, for sure.
And they want to put more money directly into the hands of families.
Okay.
So they're proposing increases to things like the qualified child payment, child benefit.
Okay.
So for a family with 2 kids, that could mean, a noticeable difference every week.
At the grocery store.
At the grocery store, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they're not just focusing on families.
Okay.
They're also looking at lone parents who often face on a habit harder.
So they want to increase the one-parent family payment.
Okay.
To make sure those families can actually cover their basic needs.
Okay. So they're really trying to bolster the safety net for those who need it most.
Yeah. But what about the people who are working, paying into the system?
Right.
What are they proposing for social insurance and pensions?
Okay. So they're calling for a move away from the flat rate social insurance system.
Okay.
Instead, they want payments to be based on a percentage of your previous earnings.
Okay, so it's kind of.
So it's fairer, right?
More in line with what you were.
If you lose your job or get sick,
contributing,
you're going to get back a percentage of what you were making.
Makes sense.
And in terms of pensions, they're sticking to their commitment of allowing people to retire on the state pension at 65.
Okay, so no raising the retirement age.
No raising the retirement age. They've been really vocal about that.
Big concern for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're actually quite skeptical of the government's proposed auto-enrollment pension scheme.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, they have concerns about private pension companies managing these funds. And they don't like the mandatory 6-month opt-out period for low-paid workers.
Okay, so they're saying it might not actually be.
Yeah, they're saying it might not be the best solution for everyone.
The best solution.
And it could actually disadvantage the people who can least afford it.
Okay, so some interesting ideas there.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, let's move away from some of the heavy stuff, and let's talk a little bit about arts, heritage, the Irish language.
Okay, yeah.
Not exactly front page news, but it does matter to a lot of people.
It matters to a lot of people, for sure.
What are they proposing?
Okay, so they've actually got a pretty ambitious agenda.
In this area?
In this area.
Okay.
They're pushing for a significant increase in arts funding.
Okay. How significant?
They want to see the Arts Council budget go up to $200 million.
$200 million.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big jump.
That's a huge jump.
Yeah.
That would be a major boost.
What would that mean in practice?
So that would be a major boost for artists, for arts organizations, and for cultural infrastructure.
Okay.
They even want to create a basic income for the arts scheme.
A basic income for the arts.
Building on that pilot program that was so successful recently.
Okay, yeah, so artists could
focus on their work.
Focus on their work and not have to...
worry about
paying the bills.
Exactly.
That would be amazing.
It would be fantastic.
Yeah, but how do you fund something like that?
Yeah, how do you manage it? How do you fund it?
Yeah.
Those are the big questions.
Long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a great idea.
It is, yeah.
And it shows that they understand how important...
It shows their arts are.
Yeah.
And it's not just about supporting artists. It's about making arts and culture accessible to everyone.
Absolutely.
Right? So how are they planning to do that?
Okay. So they're addressing things like the lack of affordable workspace for artists.
Okay.
They're looking at the decline of community cultural spaces.
Okay.
They want more investment in cultural infrastructure.
Okay.
Particularly in underserved communities.
So more venues, basically.
More venues, more spaces.
More access.
Yeah. Imagine having a great arts venue within walking distance of your house.
That would be fantastic.
It would be amazing, right?
Yeah.
So they're really trying to create a more vibrant and inclusive cultural landscape.
Okay, so it's a holistic approach.
It is, yeah.
And what about...
And then on top of that...
heritage and the Irish language.
They also highlight the importance of cultural heritage. So they're calling for better protection.
Okay.
Ireland's historical sites and monuments.
Okay.
Making sure those are preserved.
Right.
Increased public access to those treasures.
Yeah.
And of course, they're committed to promoting the Irish language.
Okay.
So more funding for Irish language organizations, more initiatives.
Okay. They really want to see the language play a much more prominent role in public life.
Okay, so they're not neglecting.
No, they're not.
That side of things.
They're not.
All right, well, that's great.
Yeah.
So we've covered kind of the domestic agenda here. Let's talk a little bit about Ireland's place in the world.
Right.
What kind of foreign policy are they proposing?
Okay, so they really emphasize Ireland's neutrality and independence.
Okay, so that traditional...
stance. Yeah. But they also want an active foreign policy.
Okay.
One that promotes peace, human rights, international cooperation.
Okay, so...
So they see Ireland as having this moral obligation to speak out against injustice.
Yeah.
And work for a fairer world, basically.
So they're not shying away from taking a stand on issues.
No, they're not.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, they're particularly vocal about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay.
They've been really outspoken about that.
They also call for a more democratic and accountable UN, saying that global institutions really need to be reformed to meet these 21st century challenges.
So kind of shaking things up a little bit.
Shaking things up a little bit, yeah.
But what about their stance on military neutrality?
Yeah, so they're committed to maintaining that traditional policy of military neutrality.
So no joining NATO?
No joining NATO or any other military alliance.
Right.
They say Ireland's neutrality gives it a unique voice and allows it to play a really constructive role in peace building and conflict resolution.
Okay, but doesn't that kind of limit Ireland's ability to contribute to international security efforts?
They argue that Ireland can contribute to global security without having to join a military alliance. And they point to Ireland's history of participating in UN peacekeeping missions as evidence of this. But they also acknowledge that the defense forces have been under-resourced, understaffed for years.
So
they want to increase investment.
Promising more money.
Yeah, more money for equipment, for training, for personnel.
And what about the people who are already serving?
They want to improve the pay and conditions for those who are serving.
Right.
And they want to address the issues that were raised by the Women of Honor group.
Yeah, that was a big
scandal.
Yeah.
So they're acknowledging that a strong and well-supported military is actually essential for a neutral country.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to an issue that's been particularly contentious in recent years. Immigration.
Immigration, okay.
What are their proposals for
So they admit that Ireland's immigration system needs reform. They want to set up a new immigration management agency to streamline things, make it more efficient.
Make it a little more...
Yeah, process applications quicker, make sure people are treated fairly... Humanely, exactly. Right.
What about the Temporary Protection Directive?
One specific issue.
For Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, they're saying that should end no later than March 2026. They see it as a temporary measure. And they argue that these temporary measures create a lot of uncertainty. And they're not really sustainable.
So what happens to Ukrainian refugees after March 2026?
They're proposing a return to kind of the ordinary immigration rules for Ukrainian citizens. So those who want to stay would have to apply for work permits or other forms of residency.
And what about the people who can't go back?
Well, they say that those from safe parts of Ukraine should be assisted in returning home. So it's a tough situation.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
But beyond the specifics of Ukraine, what's their overall vision for immigration?
So they want a system that's fair, efficient, and humane. One that welcomes migrants and refugees. But also makes sure that immigration is managed in a way that benefits.
So a balance between openness?
Yeah, a balance.
Sure.
Exactly. And they talk about providing better integration supports for migrants.
So helping people.
Helping people settle in. Contribute to their communities.
Yeah, make it a smooth transition.
Exactly. So they see immigration as a potential benefit. But one that needs to be managed carefully with a focus on integration.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've explored a lot of policy areas here.
We have.
From social welfare to pensions to foreign policy and immigration.
A lot of stuff.
It seems like Sinn Fein is proposing pretty significant changes.
Absolutely, across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah.
But the big question that always comes up with these ambitious plans is how are they going to pay for it all?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, they have a financial plan. They've laid out this plan that involves spending increases, tax reforms, and strategic investments.
So break it down for us. Where are they proposing these spending increases?
So we've already talked about the increases for social welfare, housing, healthcare. They also want to invest heavily in education, childcare, climate action.
So a lot of spending.
A lot of spending, yeah.
But they're arguing that these are investments.
They're saying these are essential for Ireland's future.
So where's the money going to come from?
So they've outlined a number of tax reforms, some of which are going to be pretty controversial.
Give us an example.
So, for example, they're proposing to abolish the USC on the first $45,000 of income.
Okay, so that would be a big tax cut.
That would be a big tax cut.
For a lot of people.
For a lot of people, yeah.
But wouldn't that leave a massive hole in the budget?
They say that would be offset by other revenue-raising measures.
Like what?
So things like a new wealth tax on high earners.
Okay, so kind of shifting the burden. From the lower and middle income earners to the...
Yeah, they also want to increase the banking levy.
Okay.
Crack down on tax avoidance by corporations.
Okay, so making sure everyone's
paying their fair share.
Paying their fair share.
See, exact.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about those strategic investments you mentioned?
Okay, so remember that $14.1 billion in Apple tax money?
Oh, yeah, the money that Ireland got back.
That Ireland got back from the EU?
From the EU.
Yeah, they want to use that for a bunch of different capital investments.
Okay, like what?
So things like the $1 billion Community Investment Fund,
okay.
$2 billion for healthcare infrastructure,
okay,
and then a whopping $7.6 billion for their public housing program.
Okay, so they're really trying to make the most...
They're trying to put that money to work.
Of that windfall.
Yeah, they're saying it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make these transformative investments.
But are they spreading themselves too thin?
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of different...
It is a lot of different areas.
So we'll have to see if they can manage all that.
How they prioritize things.
All right, well, we've talked a lot about their policies. What about political reform?
Okay, so they actually have a whole package of reforms aimed at making the government more transparent, accountable, and efficient.
All right, so how are they going to do that?
So they're calling for changes to how the Dale operates, more opportunities for public participation.
Okay, so getting people...
Greater scrutiny of government actions.
Involved.
Yeah, more citizen engagement, basically.
Yeah.
And they also want to change the electoral system.
Okay. That's so.
So things like automatic voter registration, measures to increase the representation of women in politics.
Okay.
They argue that a more diverse and representative government is good for democracy.
Makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And what about corruption?
So they want to tackle corruption and cronyism head on.
Okay.
So they're proposing to strengthen the Standards and Public Office Commission.
Okay.
Give it more power to actually investigate and punish wrongdoing.
Okay, so more teeth.
More teeth, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a pretty ambitious plan for political change.
It is, but, you know, as with all of these things, it remains to be seen whether they can actually implement these ideas.
It's one thing to say it.
Yeah, because...
It's another thing to actually do it.
Governing is a lot different than writing a manifesto.
Reality is much more complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
In this deep dive so far.
A lot.
We've seen how Sinn Fein wants to tackle all these big issues: housing, healthcare, cost of living, reunification.
Big stuff.
Even reform the political system. It's a comprehensive and ambitious agenda.
Absolutely.
Ambitious.
You know, it's really interesting to see how I think what's interesting is how they're trying to position themselves, right?
Trying to position themselves, yeah.
They're not just appealing to their traditional base anymore.
Right. They're trying to appeal to...
They're reaching out to a
broader spectrum.
Broader spectrum of voters.
It's like they're trying to reach...
And this manifesto, it's interesting. It's got elements of social democracy, what it means to be a left-wing party,
environmentalist,
in the 21st century, you know?
Even a bit of nationalism.
Yeah, they're talking about economic justice, but also national identity and cultural heritage.
Right.
It's a very...
So it's not easy to put them in a box.
Yeah, it's a complex mix.
It is. They're drawing on ideas from a variety of sources to try to create this unique political identity.
And maybe that's their strength, you know?
Maybe, yeah.
They're appealing to voters who are disillusioned with...
I think they're tapping into this desire for change.
The old ways of doing things. People want something different.
Yeah.
They want a system that actually prioritizes...
And they're offering...
the needs of ordinary people.
A new way...
over the interests of corporations and the wealthy.
Thinking about politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the question is, how are they going to translate these grand ideas...
That's the challenge.
...into concrete action?
Right. Manifestos are full of promises.
Right. Anyone can.
But governing is a lot more complicated.
Write a nice-sounding document.
There are always constraints. You have to compromise.
Right.
You run into unexpected obstacles.
So it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to actually do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, well, I think we've done a pretty good job
Yeah.
of unpacking the Sinn Fein Manifesto 2024 here.
We've covered a lot.
We've seen their ambitions for housing, healthcare, social welfare, climate action, reunification.
Even political reform.
Even political reform.
Yeah.
So it's a bold vision.
It is.
It's a comprehensive agenda. And it's sparked a lot of
it's definitely got people talking.
Conversation and debate.
For sure.
And, that's what we hope to achieve with these deep dives.
Exactly.
We want to give you the information you need.
We want to equip you with the knowledge.
To engage in these discussions.
And the insights you need to really understand what's going on.
And make informed choices about the future of Ireland.
Absolutely. Because ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide what direction we want the country to take.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
There's so much more in this document.
There's always more to explore.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum.
Right.
It's so important to engage with these ideas.
Yeah, challenge your assumptions.
Challenge your assumptions.
Participate in shaping the future of your country.
And participate in shaping the future of Ireland.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
On this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep asking questions.
Keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Keep diving deep.
And keep diving deep. So it's really interesting how Sinn Fein is trying to position themselves with this manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not just appealing to their traditional base.
Right. It feels much broader now.
Yeah. It's much broader. It's like they're trying to redefine what it means to be a funded.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting blend.
Left-wing party.
Right. They've got social democracy in there, environmentalism, even a touch of nationalism.
Yeah.
It's hard to just label them as left or right.
Yeah, it's very 21st century.
It is.
In that way.
Very much so. Yeah.
They're talking about economic justice, but they're also talking about...
But also those traditional values.
National identity.
Yeah, national identity.
And cultural heritage. It's a very complex mix.
It's complex, and it's probably one of their biggest strengths, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think they're really tapping into this desire.
This desire for change.
For change that's out there.
People are tired of the same old, same old.
People are disillusioned with the old ways of doing things.
They want a system that works for them.
Yeah, they want a system that works for ordinary people.
Yeah, that actually prioritizes their needs.
Yeah, and that...
Instead of just corporations and the wealthy.
Puts people first.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not just about...
It's
specific policies. It's about a vision for a different kind of...
A different Ireland. Yeah.
Yeah. But the big question is...
But as always, the devil's is the details right now.
Oh, do they actually...
It's one thing to write this in a manifesto.
Translate these grand ideas.
It's another thing to actually make it happen.
Into concrete action.
Yeah.
Governing is messy.
It is.
There's always constraints.
You've got to compromise.
There's unforeseen obstacles.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a good starting point.
It is, yeah.
But it's just a starting point.
And that's why it's important to think critically about this stuff.
Yeah.
Don't just accept it or reject it.
Exactly.
Actually take the time to understand what they're saying.
Yeah. Do your own research.
Yeah. Look at the evidence. Weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's up to each of us to decide what we want for Ireland.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, I think so.
This deep dive on the Sinn Fein Manifesto 2024.
We've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've looked at their proposals on housing, healthcare, social welfare, climate action, reunification, political reform.
Even political reform, yeah.
We've really seen the scope
the whole gamut
of their ambition here.
Absolutely.
And hopefully this has given you a better understanding of
hopefully this has helped you.
Where they're coming from. Kind of grapple with what they're proposing.
Yeah.
Because it's complicated stuff.
It is. It is. But it's important stuff.
Absolutely. And it affects all of us.
Regardless of how you feel about Sinn Fein, these are issues that are going to be...
These are the big issues.
Shaping the future of Ireland.
That we all have to grapple with.
So it's important to be informed.
Absolutely.
It's important to be engaged.
Yeah, stay informed, stay engaged.
And it's important to have these
conversations. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On this deep dive.
It's been fun.
Until next time, keep asking questions.
Keep exploring.
Keep exploring and keep diving deep.
And keep diving deep.